My name is Giovina Romandine. Giovina Marie Romandine. You can't get any more Italian than that, so this is the subject there, dear. Like she said, I grew up on the what they call the near West Side in the Austin neighborhood for about 20 years, and then the last that's gonna give my age away. But the last 38, been on the Northwest Side in the Portage Park area. So born and bred Chicago. And I run several meetup groups. I run 1001 Things to See in Chicago, Exploring Chicago with Friends, Windy City Wine. I do a Northwest Side women's group. I have a book club. So I keep busy. And when I'm not doing that, I actually do work full time. I work in book publishing. I do have a job. I'm not retired, as many people think that I am. I work for a children's book publisher. We make children's books. I work in the operations. I get the stuff out of China right now with tariffs, but that's, that's another thing. But anyways, and my big motto is to be a tourist in your own city. Get out there, walk, get into a neighborhood. Even if you live in the neighborhood, you think you know it. When I started doing the Portage Park tours, I'm like, oh, I didn't know it. I've lived in this neighborhood 38 years. So, but anyways, like to preface this talk that I'm obviously Italian, but I'm not 100% Italian. I do have a little German in me. My father's mother was German, but he was more. And my mother grew up on Taylor Street, which is in Little Italy, and my father grew up in Chicago Heights, which was another little Italian enclave. And a lot of my family worked for the city of Chicago, which was common with Italians, especially in the 40s and 50s. Let's put it this way, I have an uncle named Hugo, uncle named Louis, an uncle named Guido. So we can't get anywhere. When we were little kids, we couldn't say Guido. We used to say Guido, Guido. My friends would say, "Why are you calling him weirdo?" I'm like, no. We just couldn't say Guido. So, but anyways, in fact, actually, I'm pretty sure Sam that gave a talk a couple weeks ago. I think my uncle was her boss for not her boss, but her father's boss in Streets and Sands. So. And typical Chicago jobs, when you work for the city of Chicago, it's all patronage, and they used to have to, they had X amount, depending on what they made, take out of their salary, and it went for this democratic banquet that you went to. Whether you went or not, you were getting taken out. So my uncles always decided they were going to bring everybody and their brother, they were going to get their money's worth. So. But that being said, in the neighborhood that I grew up on, the west side, was Italian. It was a lot of the Italians that got displaced from Little Italy. And then they kind of moved, and then they moved northwest. They moved to now on Harlem Avenue is another Little Italy. Now, in fact, they've moved even further. They're out further west in Itasca and Addison. But basically, when you're in Chicago and you want to get things done, you have a guy. Everybody has a guy. This is how Chicago works, especially if you want a patron government job. That's how my uncle's got a job. I worked for one summer for the toll booths. I went to see a guy, and no interview. It was just, okay, you got a job. But if you had a problem with the police, you talk to your guy. If you needed your car fixed, if you need something with your house, that's just kind of how it worked. You need a new TV, you had a guy. So basically, in Chicago, everybody, like I said, has a guy, and they call Chicago the My Guy Club. So, so especially back in that day. So I went to Italian Catholic high school, went to Mother Theodore Guerin, which was in River Grove, which is another enclave of Italians that moved down Elmwood Park, Melrose Park, River Grove. I went to school with a lot of girls that their dads worked in waste management, construction. They were, yes, they had designer clothes. We used to call, everything. And but we used to say behind their back, "Oh, those are the mafia princesses." But you didn't mess with them because you're never really sure. The topic today that I'm specifically talking about just a specific time period, because everybody's talked to death about the 20s and Capone and how it started, and then we've got a couple of people that 2 weeks ago that they had talked about Operation Glamour and they were talking about the newer stuff. I'm talking of kind of like the glory days or the heydays of the mob when we were at the height in the 50s, 60s, and somewhat of the 70s. Just to kind of go through, because that doesn't get talked about as much, because those mob guys, except for Giancana, weren't as flashy. There was a few, but Giancana and Rika and stuff, they kind of kept a little more key, and they were like ghost puppet masters behind the scenes. So, and then unfortunately, when you start getting into the 70s and 80s, the mafia or the outfit in Chicago, we call it the outfit, starts to go downhill. But anyways, in Chicago, like I said, I mentioned the several neighborhoods that we have. My mother grew up on Taylor Street. I live near Harlem Avenue, but you also had the Patch in West Town, which is where you find your Our Lady of Angels Church, and of course they had the fire there. Then you've got the Heart of Italy, which is around like 26th and Oakley, and that's where you got Bruno and Bacchanalia. A lot of people that work at 26th in California like to go eat a Bruno and Bacchanalia. There's more. I think we're down to like 2 or 3 Italian restaurants over there. You've got like the River West area, Grand and Milwaukee, where you have D'Amato's and Bari and and all that. So you had these little enclaves of where the Italians grew up when they first came over. So, but let me explain a little bit. I'm just going to do a little brief about the origins of the mafia and our beginning, and then kind of get into it. I'm sure most of you already know this, but anyways, in Sicilians in the 19th century, they came during the 1800s. They came. Sicily was under rule of what they call Bourbon monarchy, and at that time, Italy was a bunch of little fiefdoms, if you want to call it. They weren't one country, but wealthy landlords often hired private enforcers to protect their estates from bandits, and over time, the intimidation, control to control the local populations, and they operated under the system they call omerta, the code of silence, or pizzo, protection, racketeering. And I don't speak a lot of Italian, so pardon me, even though I am, and I don't. So my pronunciations might not always be correct. And then when they came over here, they brought that, and they brought that with them, to New York, to Chicago, to New Orleans, a couple different other cities. St. Louis is another one, Kansas City. But anyways, when the waves of immigrants started coming in, and they were kind of put in, for better terms, kind of ghettos, and they were all congregating. They started their same racketeering things, and protection, and shaking down businesses. And then there was the turning point with the Prohibition era. That's when everything flourished. But the Chicago outfit, as it's called, because we don't call it necessarily the mafia, started just about the same time around New York. We kind of started in Pennsylvania. New York, I would say, sort of ruled us, but we did operate on our own. But we were kind of like fully under our own control. So we had, obviously, we had big Jim Colosimo. And then when he called his friend or cousin, Johnny Torrio, from New York to come help him out in the 1910s, that's kind of how things really started getting started. So then by the 20s, we were definitely independent, weren't really using New York. So, and the key differences with the Chicago mob, or mafia, from New York is we had a lot more political influence because we had a lot more corrupt politicians, go figure. And we were centralized, in New York they had the 5 families, Chicago had 1 family. So that's, listen to the, to the one guy, the guy. So, and sometimes he, had acting guys, because he wanted to stay in the shadows, or maybe he was under indictment and he wasn't supposed to be affiliated with criminals. So that's sometimes what they did. But we definitely had, like I said, more political influence. We had less internal conflict because we didn't have these 5 families always trying to vie for power. Not to say that we didn't have, conflicts, but we had a more diverse membership. So the outfit included a lot of associates, or friends of ours, as they like to say, for non-Italian. So they did the Irish and Jewish and Polish criminals. They would work all together. Where New York they kind of stuck more with trying to be more Italian, and then you're going to get made if you were Sicilian. And whoops, sorry. I have to look at my notes. I might have to bear with me. I think I'm going to have to put my glasses on. And I'm sorry. This is Taylor Street. I'm lacking on my pictures here. This is Taylor Street, probably in about 1920s. And this is how big Little Italy used to be, and then UIC came in and took a big chunk of it. That's what happened to my mother. That's why she had to move in the 60s. And this is, I forget the name of this church. I think this is Our Lady of Angels. I'm not sure. And then we got here D'Amato's. Let me get to her. This is by my house, Piazza Italiana. And they're talking about the Black Hand. And then here's a little gang of guys, the Black Hand here, the tens. And here's our first guy, Big Jim Colosimo. Here, let me get to him. He was a boss from about 1910 to 1920. He wasn't the first boss of the Chicago outfit, but just kind of picked him because he's kind of notorious to go into the next few that kind of we get into the Roaring '20s. But he played a significant role in the pre-Prohibition era, especially in establishing vast prostitution in Chicago. So, and then by 1909, there was other Black Hand gangs, and they were doing extortion, and so they were trying to muscle in on his territory. So I'm sorry, I said John Notorio was his cousin, is actually his nephew. So sorry about that. So they brought John Notorio in for Brooklyn, and he appointed him as underboss. And then in the following year, he opened up Colosimo's Cafe, a restaurant and nightclub located at 2126 South Wabash Avenue. Colosimo's downfall came in 1920 when he made a fateful decision. With the onset of Prohibition, Torio recognized, we need to get in this. This is going to be a good moneymaker. And he was resistant. He said, no, I didn't think it was going to be a good idea. So they tried to persuade him, and he kept saying no. So Torio realized, we need to remove Big Jim Colosimo. So when they say they need to remove somebody, their days are numbered. He's going to be killed. So that's what happened. So Torio, with the assistance of a young protege named Al Capone that they brought in, that he came in about 1919 from Brooklyn. He came in and another mobster, Frankie Yale, and they plotted his downfall. And he was shot in the back of the head in his own restaurant. They don't know if it was either Frankie Yale or Al Capone. Allegedly, one of them shot him, but he was basically killed at his own restaurant. So that brought in the reign of John Notorio from 1920 to 25. They had, at this period, you also had the North and South, the Irish gang. So you had some tension going on because everybody was trying to get the same piece of the pie for the bootleg money. And, making getting the beer and the bathtub gin and everything. Torio was 38 when he took over. And for the next 5 years, he would develop the outfit into a force to be reckoned with. Even to this day, they say, it's time with, it was widely influential. He even went and helped advise the Genovese crime family in New York. And he kind of was in talks with Luciano and talking about this crime syndicate, which they eventually did in the 30s. At the time, he was considered one of the smartest mobsters of the time. Not all these guys are rocket scientists, so sometimes being the smartest guy is not necessarily a compliment, but he was considered pretty smart. But that doesn't save you from getting whacked, basically. So because it really doesn't. Because so what happened was. in 1925, he handed over the outfit to Capone because after the North Side group of Jaime Weiss, Vincent Drucci, and Bugs Moran, they attacked him. They basically like pretty much beat the shit out of him. Out of his apartment on 7001 South Clyde Avenue. He was coming home from a shopping trip with his wife. He was struck on the jaw, lungs, groin, legs, and abdomen, and they tried to finish him off by hitting him over the head, and then he was going to shoot him in the head with his gun, but for some reason, Weiss's gun jammed, supposedly, and so they just kicked him repeatedly in the stomach, and then they hit him with a billy club. I'm sorry, the tutorial with billy club. And they decided to leave at this point. They don't know why. They don't know if they didn't want to get caught by the police. They thought they finished the job, whatever, but he survived. But he was like, that's it, I'm done. So he's like, I'm retired. He gave it to Capone. And because of that, he went to live on until 1957 at the age of 75. And in the mob world, that's old. You don't get to be, So that brought in L. Scarface, and these guys all have these lovely nicknames. So sometimes I find out what the nickname means. Sometimes I could never figure it out. So, but Al went by the nickname Scarface or Big Al. Scarface was a lot of the newspapers who put that in, or its enemies. You did not say that to his face, or you'd get a Scarface. They would probably either call him Al or Sir, but. Yeah, they were respectful. But anyways, he was one that was born in Brooklyn in 1889 to Italian immigrants. He joined the street gangs out in New York, including the famous 5 Points gang. He got his famous scar after an argument with a man over his sister in a bar fight. So, and that's where he got that scar. He came to Chicago, like I said before, in 1919. He worked for Johnny Ottorio. And then in early 1925, at just 26 years old, and that's kind of young for somebody to come up and be, the head guy, even in that time, he took charge of the outfit, and he led it into a new area of all kind of illegal activities. He really got into the political protection and law enforcement. He got them as much as he could on the payroll, and then his violent tactics would increase revenue. He would punish anybody that didn't want to buy his alcohol, and he was one of the first bosses to embrace the public eye, being in custom suits and his cigar and expensive cigars, and his favorite drink was a Templeton Rye. And they estimate that he, during that time, probably made about $100 million per year, which would be about $1.5 billion today, which is what he was bringing to the show. And he just bribed everybody, police, and the police and the politicians, and he thought, he was untouchable, which if you saw the movie Untouchables, he was not. he thought. So, but he became like a national celebrity. He opened a soup kitchen, at the start of 1931 with the beginning of the Depression. And then tensions between him and the North and South Side gangs culminated with the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre. Now he got finally caught, not for his criminal somewhat criminal activities, but not the violent ones, for tax evasion in 1931. And they estimated that he owed $215,000 in taxes, which would be millions of dollars today. And he was 33 years old at the time, so he was still young. He was convicted in October of 1931. He was sentenced to 11 years. He began a sentence in Atlanta, and in 1932 and 1934, he was infamously transferred to Alcatraz, where he was isolated from his mob buddies. But his mental and physical health started to decline due to untreated syphilis, and he was eventually released in 1939, just serving about 7 years. And his health declined over the next few years, and he died in 1947. So when he went to jail is when his buddy, sorry, this is Toria. I keep forgetting to show my pictures. And here's Scarface. Here he is with some of his buddies at court. And this is Frank Nitti without a mustache. I like the ones with Frank Nitti with the mustache, but I had to find somebody without the mustache. But anyways, Frank, the enforcer Nitti, and he was born Francesco Raffaello Nitti in Italy in 1886. He immigrated to U.S. as a child. He worked as a barber. I did not know this, but he worked as a barber, and they got involved in bootlegging and organized crime shortly after that. He was an enforcer for Al Capone, and that's where he got the name. He was Nitti the Enforcer. He was basically his right-hand man, and then he later said became, obviously the boss. And he was 45 when he was the boss. He was also convicted at the same time that Capone was for tax evasion, but he only got an 18-month sentence as opposed to Capone's 11-year stretch. So he did have to serve when he first took over. He did have to serve some time, and he was extremely claustrophobic, and it took a toll on him. So he decided he was never going to go back to prison again. So that'll come into play. but anyways, that he was the acting boss. They say he was kind of the acting boss for the next 11 years because of really Paul Ricca, which I'm going to show you. Here's another one of Frank Nitti. I don't know if I have one with his. Here's Paul Ricca. I guess I didn't save one with his stash because he's got a big, big stash. But anyways, that he was really more the behind the scenes, the real man in charge. But anyways, Nitti would help move the outfit toward labor unions and extortion, branching them out to, from the gambling and prostitution rackets. And that move would prove to be a very successful one. And then, like I said, he was faced with another jail sentence because there was a big Hollywood film industry extortion because they expanded out west and they were extorting the film producers and things because they ran the unions, and you want a union guy, to work, you got to pay him. And he was not going to go to jail again, prison again. So what he did is he went out to a local train yard and shot himself in the head. So unlike the movie, The Untouchables, Elliot Ness didn't push him off a roof. So he did commit suicide. So then the power just went seamlessly over to Paul Ricca, that was already kind of running things in 1943. And that brings us to Paul Ricca here, they called him the waiter. Paul Ricca, the waiter. He was born Felice de Lucca in Naples, Italy. He immigrated into Chicago in the 20s. Unlike Capone, he kept a low profile. Here he is when he's in court. They always seem to be in court. So there's a lot of court pictures. That's where I got a lot of my photos. So, but he wanted to keep a low profile. He was kind of more of a quiet. And so they call him the quiet power behind the outfit. He was from 43 to 47. He ran it. So he, during World War II, we had the infiltration into Hollywood, and that's kind of where that whole thing with Nitti came about. But that was because they're controlled with the labor unions, the Teamsters, the projection unions, and they skimmed. Anytime they did anything, then they went out to Vegas. They skimmed there too, but the Vegas wasn't just yet. That's a little bit. But anyways, then they went to Vegas. They did the same thing. Then they had the Hollywood extortion case, and then he got in trouble too with that. He was sentenced to 10 years of prison. He went to jail. That's I think there was a court case here. He only served 3 years, and so he in the 50s and 60s kind of stayed behind the scenes boss because he was not supposed to associate with criminals, even though he was. But he had to, he had to put appearances up. So, but despite multiple investigations, he never served a serious prison sentence again. He died in 1972 of natural causes, which in the mob world is, a rare feat. But he brought the outfit to more of the modernization where they're more secretive, disciplined, politically connected, and that's kind of what his creation is. So from there, we get to my favorite guy, Tony Joey Batters Accardo. He got the nickname Big Tuna, but that was from the media because they busted him one time when he was, I believe it was out in Florida, and he was deep sea fishing. He had tuna in his thing. So sometimes some of these nicknames are not from their guys; it's from the media, the press. So, but he was called. Because they're the brains behind the mob, and they call a lot of them the brains behind. But anyways, he's an untouchable boss, and he was definitely untouchable. He was born Antonio Leonardo Accardo in 1906. He was born in Chicago to Sicilian immigrants. He started as a street thug and enforcer in Capone's gang. He got the nickname Joey Batters after impressing Capone, and this must have been a good feat because Capone was violent, by brutally beating two men to death with a baseball bat. So that's where his nickname came. So, and he is considered one of the most powerful and longest lasting, because he ran them up from like 47 to 71, but then he comes back again and he runs it. And he runs it, he all the way till his death in 1990. That's further down my notes. But anyways, he ran it a long time. So they believe he participated in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, allegedly. And then, I'm sorry here. He tried to get the outfit, or he did actually get it beyond, bootleg it into labor unions, casinos, and loan sharking. He oversaw the outfit's casino skimming in Las Vegas. He expanded the mob's reach into Hollywood, Florida, Latin America. He, was quiet, but he used fear and calculated violence. So he kept the mob disciplined. If someone crossed him, they usually just disappeared. It was just quiet. They were just, where did he go? We don't know. So in 1957, he stepped down as the official boss and handed it over to Sam Giancana, but he still remained the true power, so they kind of call him the ghost boss here. That's why he had such a long stretch, because he was kind of in and out. So that brings us to, this is Big Tuna when he was older. He went to court a lot, but he never got convicted. That brings us to Sam Momo Giancana. He was a boss from 1957 to 1966. He was born Salvatore Giancana in 1908 in Chicago to Sicilian immigrants. He grew up in the Patch, which is kind of around where Cabrini Green was at the time. Now it's very expensive condos. But it was very tough. They used to call it like Little Hell. It was a very tough Italian neighborhood on the city's west side. He became involved with the Chicago's, they had a notorious gang, which was the 42 gang. There was a violent street gang, and that was like a recruitment pool. Whoever kind of lasted through that and was the toughest, got to stay in the outfit. He got a reputation as a fearless hitman and a good getaway driver, and that got Tony Accardo's attention. And he's considered one of the most powerful and controversial bosses, because obviously Las Vegas, but his political connections, Cuba, he got into national politics. He was definitely interesting. He oversaw a lot of the gambling operations in Cicero. So, and then, like I said, when Accardo stepped back, he was the front man. But he's notorious for a couple of things, and one of them is CIA, trying to work with the CIA to help assassinate Fidel Castro, and the Kennedy connection. It's never could really be substantiated, but they say that Kennedy had enough votes anyways, but they said they brought a lot of votes in for Kennedy, so they helped rig the election. So that's where the Chicago saying is, you can vote once or often. You could be dead and still vote in Chicago. That's kind of how it works. But he had connections through John Kennedy's father, and that's because his father Kennedy's come from a family. His father was a bootlegger. So, but anyways, he controlled the Las Vegas casino profits. He always, they took a cut from. They did this. He really focused on the Stardust and the Tropicana. Then he ruthlessly got rid of any rivals or members. He, ordered a lot of hits of political rivals. And in 1966, he was bringing a little too much attention. Mob didn't like this. You know, you bring too much media attention, it's not good. So he was forced out of power and he fled to Mexico. Mexico, I guess, didn't want him after a while, so they deported him back in 1974. And he was subpoenaed to testify before the Senate committee investigating mob ties to the CIA, going back to the Fidel Castro fiasco, which I'll talk more about later. But anyways, on June 19th, 1975, Giancana was shot 7 times in the head in his Oak Park home, and likely a mob hit to keep him silent. You know, dead guys can't talk. So, yeah. So hopefully you guys aren't squeamish with all this, because a lot of murder, a lot of killing. So when he was taken out and Accardo still was staying in the shadows, they brought this guy, and I couldn't find a lot of pictures. I know, but he wasn't in very long, so that may be why. His name was Felix Milwaukee Phil Eldoricio. We don't know where he got the Milwaukee Phil, because he wasn't from Milwaukee, so I don't know. Maybe he went there. We don't know. So, but he was in charge from 67 to 69, but they technically to 71, but he got in some trouble. So last year or two, it wasn't very good. But anyways, he was a hitman and enforcer. He was known for intimidation tactics. That's what all these guys are kind of known for. But he was born in 1912 in Chicago to Italian immigrant parents. He became involved with the mob in the 30s. He actually is kind of known for his creative and sadistic methods of killing. So he, I guess, liked to torture his victims before he killed them. So, but he worked closely with Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana, and they kind of noticed him. So, and he specialized in intimidation and extortion. And then, obviously, they all helps oversee the skimming in Las Vegas. And he expanded the mob's loan sharking during his tenure. His reign was short-lived because there was an FBI. So the late 60s started a lot of the FBI investigations and started to rain on a lot of these guys' parades, but it really did for him. So he was arrested and convicted in 1969 for extortion and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 8 years. And so he was in prison, so he was still kind of the boss from prison, but he died of natural causes in 1971 at the age of 59. So, so there's, I'm sorry, here's a picture of Phil Mauricio. Then Tony Accardo comes back again. So from 1972 to 1992, and but he was a shadow boss. So he was not the official, but they still had to go for him for final approval. Any big things, any big hits, any big schemes, had to get his approval. And he was no strict disciplinarian, but like I said, he was low key. He wasn't flashy. He had several houses, but they wouldn't be always necessarily the most ostentatious on the block. He had one in River Forest, and then he had one in Barrington. But anyways, he expanded. He was known for expanding the mob, the outfit to California, South America, particularly drug trafficking and gambling. Obviously, they were still skimming money from Vegas. And there's infamous burglary. Somebody robbed his house in 1978. Was burglarized, and that was considered, a direct insult. I don't know if they knew who they were robbing, but within weeks, at least 7 suspected burglars were tortured and murdered. So this reinforced the reputation. Yeah. So no one crossed Accardo and lived. So so don't go robbing his house. So he didn't need an alarm. They just knew. So, but anyways, in the 80s they started with the skimming crackdowns. The FBI started closing in, and then the several top mobsters like Joe Alpa and Jackie Cerrone were convicted in the casino skimming trial, which was called Operation Strawman. The FBI always comes up with these these lovely names. But he died, he was in his 80s, and he died in Barrington Hills in his house at the age of 86. So, so he was, died at ripe old age. So, and I could preface to say on my dad's side of the family, we have some affiliation, probably some cousins and stuff like that. But he was a South Sider. But I remember him and my mom, they would always talk about Accardo. And I remember they used to go eat at Horwath. There's a lot of mob hangouts. The Horwath is not there anymore. Tom's Steakhouse is. That was another place they used to hang at. So. And this is Joey Doves Ayupa. And so he became the next boss, kind of while Accardo was staying in the shadows. They called him Joey the Doves, and he's known for his brutality, gambling operations, skiing. And he was born in Melrose Park. So this name I remember because I went to school in Melrose Park, and so I think I went to school with some of his family members. So, but. Let's see here. So anyways, he owned this Taylor and Company pheasant farm, which he used to illegally sell mourning doves, and that's where he got the name of of doves. So, and really he got the name because the FBI agents busted him in 1962 for having over 500 frozen doves for his hunting, and so that became the inside joke that he was. Oh, thank you, doves. So. See where I'm at, so I make sure I'm not. Okay, so we're good. Yeah. So, okay, let me find my spot here. So, he authorized the hit on Tony Spilotro, and so if you saw the movie Casino. That was Joe Pesci's thing when they, because he was making too much noise and getting too much attention and getting arrested too much. And I forget the actor's name that played him. For some reason, I thought those guys were reporting to guys in New York, and they weren't. They were reporting to guys in Chicago, because Spilotro, Chicago. But anyways, in 1986, Ayupa was convicted in the FBI's Las Vegas skimming trial, and that's his arrested. And this kind of marks the beginning of the decline of the mob and the FBI's pressure on them. So that brings us to this guy here. They all got a lovely mugshot. This is Joseph Joel Nagal Ferriola. He was from 86 to 89. He was another brutal but short-lived Chicago boss. And he took over with the imprisonment of Joey Doves and Jackie the Lackey. They love these names, Cerrone. That was Joey's underboss. And he was born in 1927. He wasn't politically connected like the other guys was, and so that kind of led to his downfall because he didn't have the connections to get the politicians with the first ward. If you guys were here last week or saw last week with Leda, it gets all connected. So we're gonna do the Venn diagram. It's all gonna be connected, but for the mob world. So, but he did work closely with union bosses to keep the money flowing, and then but the pressure of the FBI, them cracking down, it just was continually decline, and people were getting busted or killed. He had health issues, and he died in 1989 from a severe heart attack, and that brought this guy in, Sam Carlisi. I couldn't find a nickname for him, but I don't know. He looks mad, so maybe he doesn't. But he doesn't need a nickname. So, but he's considered one of the last traditional Chicago bosses. He was born in 1929. He took over as the acting boss. And then Accardo came back, but he was still kind of working. And he's considered one of the final traditional mob bosses. And under his leadership, he still did the gambling operations, but they went to more low-key criminal enterprises because they didn't have the Las Vegas skimming as much as they used to, because that kind of went all corporate, and so you get robbed a different way from the corporations. So, but he obviously had the less extravagant lifestyle. He went to like smaller, more clandestine operations. Um, and he had a lot of problems with the FBI and a lot of investigations. And during the 1990s, so he had a lot of legal challenges. In 1995, he was convicted for racketeering charges and was sentenced to prison. And then he died in 2006 of age 77. But actually, he got out of prison in 2000 due to his health issue, but then he died shortly after. And then 96 to 2004 is just like the beginning of the end. We went through a couple of different guys. We had this guy, Johnny Montiglione. He was from the late 90s to early 2000s. Then we had, I don't have a picture of him, we had Jimmy Giovina. This is a chart of the mob. It gets very, but then we went to John. Let me see if I got a picture of John. No nose, but I do not. So no nose, yeah. And I thought I had a picture of him, but I think he had his nose busted, so that's why. He was from the late 2000s to early 2010s. Then we had Salvatore Sam De Laurentiis, excuse me. And I think I actually need some water. It's good, but we had De Laurentiis, and then we had another gentleman by the name of Big Mike Sarno. And then right now, it's very decentralized. There's not like one leader. They're kind of fractioned out. It's very small. It was in the 50s and 60s. There was like 200 to 300 mafia guys. There's now like with thousands of associates. Now there's like 28 with maybe a couple hundred. So it's it's a shadow of what it once was. So. And the younger generations are trying to find new criminal rackets, so they're doing some things with online and, things like that. But the key factors for the Alpha Zombies in the 50s and 60s was basically because there was the peak of their power. They had guys like Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana. They expanded nationwide. They went to Vegas, they went to Hollywood, they went overseas. They had politicians in their pockets that helped. The Kennedy family, they had some major politicians. They skimming extortions. They did some big deals. They did some big construction projects because they ran a lot of these unions. So they did building skyscrapers, real estate developments, and of course they always skimmed off of that. They skimmed off the guys paying union dues. They basically kind of controlled every aspect at that time. And they had the police in their pockets as well. But then, you started getting the FBI crackdowns. And, the world changed in the 60s and you had different gangs coming in and they kind of, went from there. So with that, now I'm going to talk a little bit how Chicago politics played a role in with this, because that's kind of what fed the mob and kept them going. So basically, the rise of the Democratic. Oh, and I just want to point out this picture. This is at Tom's Steakhouse, and there's Accardo. There is Joey the Clown. Lombardo is up in the corner over here. Iupa, and there's a couple other guys. So, but they all look like just little family guys. Oh, here's another one that goes back more the 60s. This is Iupa and Lombardo and I'm trying to think who the other guy is. I think it's one of the politicians, but they look like nice guys going to a wedding. So, not such. Here's another one with Accardo. This is Spilatro, Tony Spilatro, and Iupa, who was kind of like Spilatro's mentor. That's why it was not surprised that he put the hit on him. Now, this is probably the funniest thing I came across. And let me see if I can get this. Let me see if I got this. Wait, hold on. I got it this bigger. So you can see. So they look like three grandpas, and they got a shirt. He's probably got a shirt that says Tony on it. And I found this on Reddit, and some guy says, They look like they're at like their grandkids' baseball game, and, you know, or something. And somebody said, "What's with the names on the shirt?" And somebody else wrote, "Well, that's so the FBI guys know who they're, you know, so they arrest the right guys, so they got their names on them." I was just so funny because you don't see them sitting there like, you know. Well, this was probably at one of the grandkids, you know, stuff like that. Nice family guys. So now we're getting into politics. Sorry, I'm a little behind in my pictures. But by the 1930s, the Democratic Party firmly controlled the Chicago machine, largely to support with immigrant groups, especially the Irish, Polish, Italian, Eastern European. And this era was characterized by powerful mayors and bosses. You know, and they ruled with an iron grip. The first one that's really associated with the machine is Anton Cermak, and that's Daley, but let me get to Anton Cermak. And he was an immigrant, and he got the ethnic votes, and he forged alliances with labor unions and businesses to ensure his, you know, kept his grip. He was assassinated in 1933. It was intended for Franklin D. Roosevelt, but that just, you know, certified. I believe he is buried over in Rose Hill Cemetery. So as that comes to, and here's a nice picture of the culture of corruption. This is just encapsulates Chicago to a T. Everybody's got their hand out for something. So, I don't got another picture of Mayor Daley, but everybody knows what Mayor J. Daley is. But he was probably the most famous Chicago machine politician. He was in office from 1955 to his death in 1976. He served as mayor 21 years, and he chaired the Cook County Democratic Party. Basically, he ruled kind of like the mob did with an absolute fist. Every aspect of city government, from patronage, jobs, to police officers. He did a lot of massive infrastructure projects. He used federal funding to help build the expressways. He did a lot of housing projects, modernized O'Hare Airport, keeping contractors and unions loyal to him. And that's where the mob comes in because they ran the unions, election rigging, voter fraud, dead people voting, people voting twice, you know, that kind of stuff. He was very heavy-handed. Everybody knows what happened in the 60s, and I think somebody's talking about that in next week or a couple weeks about the 68 Democratic Convention. He used the police to rule with, you know, a heavy hand, you know, to suppress, you know, he didn't want people rioting in his town. You know, those crazy hippies aren't going to do anything in, you know, in his Chicago. So, but I got to say something for Patty, Narragansett. She likes when I say that. But anyways, he had a lot of influence with the unions. And then one of the biggest scandals during his reign in 1973, when Alderman Thomas Keene, Daley's right-hand man, was convicted for political corruption and bribery. So they never find anything, you know, he was smart enough. So he was always, you know, like adjacent, criminally adjacent to these people, but they never caught him. He was too smart to get caught. But then the machine through the 70s, especially when he passed away, went slow into decline, and that was mainly because of civil rights and racial politics, you know, increasing conflicts between black leaders and the white political machine. African American and Latino voters began pushing for more representation, which weakened the old machine system. You know, they wanted their guy in, not necessarily voting for Daley's guy. Of course, and then there was 2 weeks ago when Sam was talking about Operation Greylord, that put a big dent, that exposed all the corruption with the Chicago courts, that led to the conviction of numerous judges, police officers, and politicians being convicted. The FBI obviously ramped up their investigations. And then with the onset of Harold Washington going into office, he was Chicago's first black mayor, and he made a break from the machine. So, and then there was, you know, this machine is kind of still around. It's nowhere near what it used to be. Because I remember as a kid, you know, if you wanted something now, it's not the same. But anyways, let's go here now to political corruption with the mob influence. So definitely Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana used their political connections and bribery to keep things going. They had a guy, and that's what this gentleman is. This is Murray the Camel Humphreys. He was the outfit's political fixer. I think I got another. No, that's Kennedy here. So I only had one picture of him. But anyways, but he was around for a while. He fixed a lot of stuff, and then how the outfit and the politicians worked together is bribing officials. The mobs paid off judges, aldermen, police officers, election fraud, union control, police and judges protection. Just kind of all went hand in hand. Now, key scandals that happened with mob control operations during this period. They had a massive network of gambling dens, so now the gambling's out in the open and it's legal around here, but I remember going to bars. My dad worked construction. He was yes, there were families. And dad worked construction, and back then construction guys didn't work in the winter. They didn't have the technology they have now, so unless it was warm. So he bartended a lot in every bar. And he thought it was entertaining to have us girls come sit with him at the bar. But they all had machines in the back. They all had gambling. That's just kind of how they did it. So, but they had like I said, this network of gambling dens, booking operations, mob-controlled casinos. And then there was an investigation in the 50s, that the Senate investigation that found an entire police districts in Chicago were accepting bribes from the outlet, so not everybody in that district, there were probably a couple good guys that weren't getting paid, but so they had some whole districts. And then there was an investigation in the 60s from Sheriff Richard Ogilvie, and he definitely confirmed that the police, the mobsters were paying off police captains, to keep their silence. And then obviously you had the Las Vegas connection, and they'd go to Vegas, skim the fund. But that ties in with the pension funds and the Teamsters and the union, so that kind of all ties back to us. So you had Frank Lefty Rosenthal and Tony Spilatro, who, like I said, was made famous in the movie Casino. Then you had 1963, the Valachi hearings, where some guys started talking. A lot of guys took the fifth. But that was kind of the first public testimony admitted to a mob, because before then, a lot of these guys didn't want to even admit that these criminals were working together. They just, oh, no, they're not. They were just in decline. So, but then, like I said, the 60s brought crackdowns and FBI cases, so but that was the 50s and 60s were definitely the golden age of corruption, so everyone was getting around. So, but there's two famous political and mob scandals during that period, and it was this one was strange. I knew about the Kennedy one. I knew a little bit about this one, not as much as the CIA and the mafia, called Strange Bedfellows. So Fidel Castro took it over Cuba in the 50s, overthrowing the U.S.-backed dictator Batista, and obviously his communist policies threatened our democracy and our business. It was more because they threatened our business interests and the money that we had there in casinos. I think a lot of mafia control casinos. And so the CIA was desperate to eliminate Castro, so they turned to the mafia, thinking they have similar interests. Well, you guys want to protect your casinos. We want to get them out of business. Let's do something together. So Giancana played a role with that in this assassination plot in 1960 through FBI agent of the name of Robert Mayu. And he approached him, Giancana and John Roselli, and the Tampa mob boss, Sam Trafficante, to assassinate Castro. And they came up with several plots to poison Castro, including poison pills in his food and drinks, an exploding cigar. Yes, really, exploding cigar was one of their ideas. Like I said, these guys are always the brightest, but that was one of their things. And snipers and hired assassins. I guess they decided to go with the poison plot. The poison plot failed because either their Cuban contacts got cold feet or Castro's security caught on. So meanwhile, though, the CIA paid Giancana and Rosehill thousands of dollars but they never spent that because they considered their patriotic duty that they were doing this, so they didn't spend the money. They were, I guess, being honorable. So there's Kennedy. And here's Sam Giancana. So then he has a Kennedy connection, and the fallout with the Kennedy, they got him supposedly in office, but with the Kennedy administration, because Bobby Kennedy decided to go after the bomb, and so that Giancana, took that as a personal affront. But he had more ties with the Kennedys because he was sleeping with Judith Exner, which was one of Kennedy's, JFK's mistresses. Well, so says so. So she was getting around. So there was a big love triangle. So, so like I said, they forced him to flee Mexico. So that would happen with Giancana. But anyways, the Castro assassination was one of the biggest CIA. Well, there's been more, but at that time it was one of the biggest CIA embarrassments. And Giancana was bringing too much spotlight. His double dealings with both the CIA and the mafia, it was just big and enormous. Now, Fidel Castro, ironically, outlived everyone involved in this plot. So everybody tried to kill him, and he died, later. So he outlived them all. So, and then, of course, everybody knows there's always been this rumor about that he assisted Kennedy in winning the election. Mayor Daley, said that too. There's no real concrete proof that there was, and Kennedy probably had enough votes anyways. I'm sure there was some illegal activities going on with that, but Kennedy probably had enough votes that didn't make a difference. So, but now let's go to notable figures and unions, because unions are. I also have. I guess I'm more connected than I realized. I have a couple cousins that work for the Teamsters. One works for the pension fund, and one works for the union. So the one that worked for the pension fund is retired, and now her son-in-law works for the pension fund. But anyways, they had this just gentleman, which is John. Let me see if I got a better picture of him. Yeah, that's the same guy. Johnny Dio DeGuardia, labor racketeer. He's connected to both the outfit and the New York Mafia. He manipulated the unions for financial gain. He set up paper locals, fake unions for extortion. So they had Ponzi schemes, even back then. Then you had this guy, Joseph Joey Gilmico, Teamsters, Local 77, and the taxi industry. And here he is with Hoffa. He was a high labor racketeer. An outfit associate. He controlled the taxi cab drivers, and he extorted money from companies and the drivers, and known for his violent tactics, including intimidations and threats against people. They all kind of use that. But he was investigated multiple times by the U.S. Senate and the FBI, but he remained influential for decades. Then you had Jimmy Hoffa, which was really technically not Chicago, but it was heavily linked to Chicago, as the Teamsters were very big here. He was the head of the Teamsters, the president of Teamsters, for 57 to 71. He used the pension fund to finance mob-controlled casinos. So that's where the guy's pensions money went to. He dealt with Sam Giancana, Tony Accardo. His disappearance in 1975 is widely believed mob-related. Who knows where he's buried? So, what do they say? He's out in Soldier Field somewhere at the. Then you've got this guy, Mad Sam DiStefano. He was a labor racketeer. He was known for his extreme violence. He enforced mob control over the labor unions. He did fake labor disputes and loan sharking. He was murdered in 1973, probably by a fellow mobster who thought he was a liability. Then you had this guy, Anthony Tony Dux Corello. He was a laborers' international union. He was based out of New York, he worked closely with the Chicago outfit leaders, and he controlled multiple unions. And then you had this guy, Alan Dorfman, that worked with the Teamsters Pension Fund, and he was considered the financial mastermind of the Teamsters multi-billion-dollar pension fund. And and he acted as a bridge between the Teamsters and the mob and directing the outfit back projects. And he was assassinated, and here's a picture of the car that he was assassinated in. He was assassinated in 1983, likely to prevent him from testifying against the mob. Now, if you guys remember the movie The Irishman, that's so Jake Hoffman played Dorfman in this. Then you've got this gentleman, Frank Skids, and I don't want to know what Skids is for, Caruso. He oversaw mob interest in construction industry, influencing hiring and contracts and more extortion schemes. So, and pretty much all the unions in Chicago were mob influenced. I mean, you've had the Teamsters, you had the Chicago Taxi Drivers Union, Labor's International Union, Hotel and Restaurant, International Longshoremen were like the top ones. They were all under the influence. But by the 60s, with the FBI investigations, and then we had the McLean committee hearings in 57 to 60. You had the RICO Act. It helped lessen their grip on these unions. So, but let me go back here. Now, that's a politician, but tell you the story of with the Teamsters, and this was in the movie The Irishman, a little bit about it. But anyways, Jimmy Hoffa was facing competition from a rival union trying to lure cab drivers in Chicago and to maintain control. Hoffa sought the help of mob boss Russell Buffalino, and I believe Russell Buffalino was played by Ray Romano in the movie. So basically, because he knew a guy. It was a hitman. You know, like I said, this goes back to the Guy Club. He knew a guy to do something, and that was Frank Sheeran. And Frank Sheeran, Hoffa and Frank Sheeran first met at a Russian bathhouse, and where they conspired to retaliate against the Seafarers Union, the first union they went after. They were gaining members, and there's a book called this too. I heard you paint houses, and that's what he said to him: is I heard you paint houses. And Hoffa was played by Al Pacino, says the Sheeran played by Robert De Niro, and basically he heard that Sheeran does hits in victims' houses, because not all hitmen did like to do that. He did, and he said, "Yes, sir, I do." And Sheeran replies, "I also do my own carpentry." Basically means he cleans up after the crime. That was his. So he's a tidy hitman, I guess is the nice way. So the next day, Sheeran flies to Chicago, where he meets the team's local president, Joe Gilcombe, and at the Russian bathhouse. But the problem, Gilcombe explains, is that the seafarer unions are signing up cabbies as well. And so the Teamsters plan to retaliate by pushing their cabs into the Chicago River. So if you remember, in the Irish, they pushed them into the but that really didn't take place. So, because what happened is Hoffa supposedly said, excuse my language, I know Patty swears like this all the time, but I don't usually do, but Mayor fucking Daley is in his pocket. He boasted, and the cops are okay with whatever the fuck we do. They're not going to push the cars in for us, but they're certainly not going to let anyone fucking stop us, basically is what they said. So Sheeran impressed Hoffa with this plan he came up with a different plan to use explosives to dispose of the cabs, leading to a long and complex friendship, but ultimately Sheeran would kill Hoffa, so if you remember from the movie. But, and so I'm taking it back. I'm sorry, some taxis did end up in the river during the union dispute, but they did more of these explosives, and the Teamsters lost the conflict. And so that was a big defeat for Hoffa, and that was kind of the beginning of the end for Hoffa. So, and then in like 67, Hoffa went to prison for fraud and corruption, and so that damaged the reputation of the union some more. Gilmacole, was never imprisoned, but he faded from power and he passed away in 1991. So, and then, like I said, I mentioned earlier that Murray the Camel Humphreys, he was a prominent figure. He was he managed the city's criminal empires, particularly in the 20s and 30s. And he was born in Canada, but he moved to Chicago at a young age. And he's known for his sharp intellect, and he was known as like the fixer, And so he's a political operative, so he was kind of the go-between, and he would smooth things out. But he started with Torrio and Capone, but he worked closely with that first ward machine. So, sorry, my thing here. So, now we're getting to some politicians that, like I said, that were linked to my. We don't have any direct connections. Oh, here's Frank Sinatra, and so this is. I want to say this is John. It's John DeArco. So the first ward, so the infamous first ward. So the first ward of Chicago was political stronghold. It's where the city officials and the criminals worked together, and a lot of stuff got done. And this guy, John DeArco Sr., because his son took over as well. He was an alderman from 51 to 93. He was born in 1912. He got in politics early. By the 50s, he was part of Pat Marcy's inner circle. Pat Marcy is another gentleman I'm going to mention. He was a Democratic committeeman and outfit fixer. My uncle was a committeeman. Like I said, I don't know. I think I'm finding more of my family, and I'm realizing. So, but he also served as a Illinois state senator for 59 to 73, and he used that to help him. And definitely was all over with this first war corruption. He worked closely with Pat Marcy and there's another alderman, Fred Roti, and they were go-betweens for the mob. He helped the outfit control city contracts, court cases, law enforcement. If the outfit needed a bill passed or a case dismissed, DeArco made it happen. He was involved in bribing judges and fixing criminal cases. He was known, he's quiet, but a powerful figure, and he can make political problems disappear with a phone call. But by the 80s, there was a lot of crackdowns in the first war of corruption. He got tangled up in Operation Gambit, which was gambling, bribery, and tax evasion. And he was never convicted for that, but his reputation was permanently damaged. And so he lost a lot of influence. So in 1994, shortly after the first ward started kind of falling, he just kind of disappeared. So then you have this gentleman, Pat Marcy. He was a Democratic comedian and outfit fixer. He was born in Pasquale, Marconi, in Chicago, 1913. Got involved with the first ward machine, controlled judgeships, zoning permits, ensured mob-friendly politicians were elected, So they would say, "Are you a friend of ours?" Was kind of their famous saying. He fixed criminal cases, ensuring mobsters and the outfit avoided convictions. He helped place corrupt judges on the bench. He allegedly fixed cases for Chicago outfit members and hitmen and bookies. Even non-mobsters had to go through him if they wanted to get anything done. In the early 1990s, he was also caught up in Operation Gambit. With the bribes. And then he was indicted in 1990 on racketeering and bribery charges and too sick to stand trial. He avoided conviction, but his associates were sent to prison. And in 1993, at age 80, he died before he could be convicted. So then you have, here's Darcy again. Here you have this gentleman, Benjamin F. Lewis. He was a 24th World Alderman. He was assassinated in 1963. I never heard much about him, but he was the first black elected official from Chicago's West Side. He was one of the most powerful black politicians in the 60s. He won re-election in 1963, but he was found murdered in his office shortly thereafter. But that's not him. That's another gentleman. His killing is widely suspected to be mob-related, though never officially solved. It's still to this day, six decades later, no one's been brought to justice. And he's faded from public memory, except maybe on the West Side, obviously his family. But they state that they think Lewis was killed at a time when white officials and gangsters worked to control profit from the black communities in Chicago, often through violence. And it isn't hard to see a straight line between the neglect and disinvestment in those communities that continues to devastate those neighborhoods. And though he may be forgotten by many, Ben Lewis murder case illustrates Chicago's enduring legacy of political corruption, police misconduct, and systemic racism. that brings us to this next gentleman, William Big Bill Dawson. He was a congressman from 1943 to 1970. He was a powerful African-American congressman from Chicago's South Side. William Big Bill Dawson was one of the most powerful black politicians at the time. He served as he was a key figure in the Democratic machine. He controlled the black votes on the South Side, and he also allegedly worked with the outfit. And he was both a trailblazer and controversial figure, known for his influence over patronage jobs, loyalty to the Daily Machine, and the mob connection. So he was like a good guy in the black community, but he did some, bad things. And he helped protect mob-run illegal gambling operations in the black neighborhoods. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in '42, so he was the first congressional district until his death in 1970. He was the first black congressman to chair a standing House committee, leading the Committee on Expenditures and Executive Departments, and he was a loyal ally to the Daily Machine. And unlike many other black politicians of the era, he wasn't a strong supporter of the civil rights movement. He opposed Martin Luther King's protests, and he stayed loyal to Mayor Daley. Because obviously Mayor Daley resisted the civil rights demands. He died in 1970 at age 84, still in office. His political machine remained influential but weakened as younger, more independent black politicians like Harold Washington came into power. But he still remains a controversial figure because he was like a first, but he's got somewhat of a tainted background. And then, like the reason the first ward is all these corrective politicians is it was the acting bridge between organized crime and the city government because it was the political stronghold of the machine of the outfit. It was you went to the first ward to get city contracts, construction, sanitation. You got business licenses, law enforcement, election fraud. And then, like I said, I mentioned earlier, Alderman D'Arco and Pat Marcy were the two key figures out there. They did election fraud and ballot fixing. They helped rig elections. They did ballot stuffing and phantom voters and intimidation. They always delivered the votes for, First Ward always delivered the votes for Richard Daley's machine and national candidates like John Kennedy. You had to get your business license, your zoning. There was a lot of extortion going on there. The outfits had control over the labor unions, the judges that were on the take. And the first ward, kind of like everything else, like the machine and the mob, they all kind of fell with federal investigations and the crackdowns in the 80s and 90s, Operation Gambit, Operation Greylord. They did a lot of redistricting. It doesn't have the hold like it used to. But it lives on. Last week Layla talked about the infamous First World Ball that goes all the way back, for the turn of the century. There obviously we had police protection. We had a whole whole precincts that were basically on the take and working, and some were working directly for the mob as security, taking bribes, juice loans. Not all districts, but a lot of them. So, but there was a couple famous CPD cases with corruption and mob protection. The Summerdale scandal in 1960 was one of the biggest police corrupt cases in that time. Was uncovered, revealed that 8 CPD officers in the Summerdale district were actively working with criminals. They were caught stealing goods from local businesses and providing protection for the mobsters. And the scandal embarrassed, like they always clutch their pearls. Oh, no, I can't believe they're stealing when they probably already had the hand in the pocket. But it was only the tip of the iceberg. Then, as I mentioned earlier, Sheriff Ogilvie had an investigation in the 60s as well in illegal gambling and police corruption. He uncovered widespread corruption, but it led to a few officers faced serious convictions. And then, you had the FBI crackdowns, and then you kind of had the decline, like everything else. So, but, sorry, I didn't go on to. Oh, here is a notable mention that I want to see. Almost, yeah, we're almost. almost done here. So I just want to know Metro Head. This is Tony the Ant Spilatro, Chicago's brutal enforcer. He was top enforcer in Las Vegas during the 70s, early 80s, known for his brutality, arrogance, short temper. He ran the outfits Loan Shark and Extortions, Protection Rackets, and he grew up in an Italian neighborhood in Old Town. His father ran a restaurant where mobsters like Sam Giancana and Jackie Cerrone were regulars. By the 50s, he was heavily involved, and in the 70s, they sent him to Vegas. He was skimming millions of dollars. But instead of keeping a low profile, a lot like they showed in the movie, he started a burglary crew known as the Hole in the Wall Gang. Yes. And the gang specialized in breaking into high-end jewelry stores, businesses, and homes by literally punching holes through walls to avoid alarms. That's what they call them. Yeah, like I said, these guys aren't creative. They were hole in the wall. That's what they did. So, but his reckless behavior, he was just attracting a lot of attention. They weren't being quiet about it. They weren't, they weren't covering their face. They were just, just being very brazen. In 1981, his gang attempted to rob a jewelry store in Las Vegas, but the FBI had been following him for 2 months. But a lot of them were on drugs at this time, and so they just didn't really pay attention, and they didn't notice they were being followed. So as soon as they broke in, they raided the scene. They were arrested, and so basically, by this, they had enough. So they were basically IUPA arranged for him to disappear, him and his brother. So what happened was, in June '86, his brother Michael and him were lured to a meeting in Bensenville, Illinois, under the impression that they would be promoted. They were going to get made, kind of like in the movie. Instead, the brothers were brutally beaten to death by mob enforcers in a basement, and they were buried out in an Indiana cornfield, discovered a week later because they didn't bury them deep enough. So then this other animal mentioned, this guy is a kook, and this is another one. So his name is Joey the Clown Lombardo. He had a cousin, Tony Lombardo, that ran a bar in my neighborhood, and my dad used to hang out with him. But he was known for every time he took a mud shot, he would just do like a face. He was just, that's where his, I couldn't find all of them. Here's one where he cut a hole in the newspaper and put a cigarette through. So, but he was a big enforcer. He was one of the most feared and cunning figures in the outfit. Despite his name, there was nothing funny about him when it came to business. He was a loan shark as well. And he worked a lot with the Las Vegas skimming. He was, and eventually got convicted for the murder of 1974 for Daniel Seifert. He got arrested and convicted under the family secrets trial, but that goes into the 1980s, and that's basically where Calabrese, I think it's Frank Calabrese, Jr., snitched on Senior, and that's what they call the family secrets, because everybody started, and then the brother, Nick, I believe, started snitching on all of them, but I just thought he was just hysterical, and like I said, I knew and he probably came in the bar too, I don't know, I just remember his cousin running the bar. But I'm going to finish off with a few funny quotes, because these mobsters always have some good sayings. So here's one Tony Accardo was attributed to. The cops aren't after me because I don't break the law. Yeah, okay. I wouldn't even kill a guy who deserved it, said while actually ordering hits on dozens of people. So then you have Sam Giancana. I own Chicago, I own Las Vegas, I own the whole damn country. And then basically he was bragging about his influence over publishing. That's kind of what led to his downfall. And then Giancana also said, why should the Kennedy family run the country when the Giancana family runs the mob? Why not the other way around? And then the FBI couldn't find a priest in the Vatican. So basically FBI's were saying they weren't good at their job. So then you got Joey Dubs Ayupa. If you want to be a wise guy, you got to dress the part. No one's going to take you seriously in cheap shoes. So he was a flashy dresser. And then he's quoted with, you see that guy? He's going to take a long vacation permanently. So that was his way of saying that guy's mark. Then you got Paul the waiter Rica. He said, I ain't no gangster, I'm a businessman. The business just happens to be crime. And then if Capone spent more time with me, he wouldn't have went to jail because he was basically saying I was smarter than Capone. If he'd hung with me and listened to me, he wouldn't have went to jail. And then during one of the mob trial testimonies, there's some good interactions. Giancana, one of the FBI agent asked him, Mr. Giancana, are you involved in organized crime? And Sam Giancana says, no, sir, I'm not even organized at home. So they said they got some witty, you know. Then in another Senate hearing, Mr. Iopa, do you know anything about illegal gambling? And Iopa said, I know people like to gamble. That's about it. So, and then you got Frank the Enforcer Nitti. He said, I never killed nobody that didn't need it. So, and that's kind of and that this is kind of where UIC is and the kind of bulldoze over Little Italy. So, but that kind of concludes the thing. We just kind of with the mob and the politics and how Chicago was run and the police, they kind of all had their glory years. You know, they had the fast 20s and 30s, and then their glory years, you know, in the 50s and 60s, and they all started going downhill, all about the same time. But in Chicago, nothing gets done without knowing a guy. So they, so.